Story time. My boyfriend cheated on me with the girl best friend. So a little background information. I was 17 and a junior in high school, and my boyfriend and I have been dating for a year. But just a little backstory about when we got together. So there were definitely some red flags that I missed, okay? One of them being that he had a girl best friend. And I don't care what y'all have to say if that makes me insecure or what, but coming from someone who has been the girl best friend, I knew this was not good at all. Especially whenever we first started dating and she was still being super friendly with him, meaning she would hold his hand, she would hang on him 24/7. And when I told him I was super uncomfortable with that and I felt like there needed to be some boundaries, he was like, yeah, I told you what it was whenever we got together. So if you don't like that, then just break up with me. Looking back on it now, that was also a red flag because I feel like he was telling me to break up with him so that way he didn't have to break up with me. Part 2 about how my boyfriend cheated on me with the girl best friend. So like I said, she would still hang all over him and he pretty much told me, if you don't like that, then you can leave. Obviously, I did not want to leave because I liked him and he was my boyfriend. So I just kept putting up with it, and eventually, we got 6 months into our relationship. So at that point, I'm thinking maybe I have a little bit more authority, to be like, hey, I don't like the way that she acts around you. You guys can't hang out like that anymore. And they would hang out alone together. He would take her to dinner. I literally tried telling him that the stuff that they do together is relationship stuff. And he was like, that's not true at all because we did all of this stuff before you and I even got together. So anyways, like I said, 6 months in, I'm like, hey, I don't like the way that you guys are hanging around each other. Once again, he gives me the same excuse. So he pretty much said that he didn't care. And the one night him and I were supposed to hang out, but he canceled on me last minute. And her and I didn't get along and she never Snapchatted me before, but then I get a Snapchat of her and him making out at his house.
Storytime about how I crashed my ex's wedding and managed to break them up a month later. I'm definitely toxic and vindictive. So when my boyfriend broke up with me, I knew what I had to do. He and I dated for 9 months. And you could say that I was a little overbearing. If you guys saw what this man looked like, maybe you'd understand. He's the type of guy that all the girls want to get with. Not only is he super handsome, but he's also very successful. And he's a great guy. Comes from a great family and he's really close to them. I, on the other hand, grew up in the foster system, so having a family was always my biggest dream. And when I met his family, they took me in right away. His mom and I essentially became best friends. His dad would take me out to dinners and lunch, and they basically adopted me as their daughter. Here's when things started going wrong. I was extremely jealous and I basically didn't let him do anything. Every time he wanted to go out with his friends, I would start a fight. Anytime he would bring up a female friend from the past, I would simply threaten to break up with him. Trust me, I recognized that what I was doing was wrong, but part of me just couldn't control myself. I was willing to do anything to make him stay with me. Eventually, he got really sick of me, started mentioning that he wanted to take a break. So that's when I told him that I was pregnant. Was I pregnant? Absolutely not. Part 2 is up. Storytime about how I crashed my ex's wedding and managed to break them up a month later. The first time he threatened to break up with me, I told him that I was pregnant. It was obviously a lie and he knew it, so he basically still walked out on me. So in order to get his attention again, I decided to go to his family and tell them that I was pregnant. And they all believed me. His mom and dad even invited me to go live with them during the pregnancy. At first I said yes, but then I was like, hold on a second. How am I gonna fake a pregnancy? So to get myself out of that, I told him that I thought I was pregnant, but I actually wasn't. Yep, I'm starting my makeup all over again at this point. I had way too many layers on. During the time we were on a break, I basically followed him around everywhere just to make sure that he wasn't hooking up with any girls. Finally, 2 weeks later, he called me and told me that he missed me. We got back together, but the same thing happened. I was still jealous and controlling, but this time he was becoming more and more jealous. So much so that he started trying to control the way that I was dressing. Around this time, we started having huge fights. He would punch the wall right by my head. I would throw things at him, even threw a knife at him once. But part of me liked that he was so jealous and toxic. He was obsessed with me. And he broke up with me again, and 2 months later, he was engaged. And guess what? His family invited me to their engagement party. Part 3 is up. Storytime about how I crashed my ex's wedding and managed to break them up a month later. That's when I get the invitation for his engagement party. At this point, it seems that my ex's parents thought we separated on good terms. So of course, I showed up to that engagement party. As soon as my ex saw me, he came straight to me and told me to leave. And I told him that I was welcome because his parents had invited me. He gave me a whole speech about how we were over and I needed to accept it. But of course, not one single part of me was willing to accept that. Then he called me an Uber, so I actually did end up leaving. When the wedding comes around, I was the first guest to show up. As soon as his parents saw me, they welcomed me. So I went and sat down at the parents' table. When my ex came out, he nearly fell over. Mind you, this is the first time I'm meeting his wife. I went up to her and told her that I was an ex of his. That's when she looked at me and said, when did you guys date? I said we dated for 9 months. And then she says that they had been dating at the same time. So then a whole bunch of drama goes down. She goes to him and starts slapping him. He starts to cry. And then his parents asked me to leave. So I did. The next month, I followed her everywhere. Finally told me to leave her alone and that they had already gotten a divorce. So my plan worked. Now I'm trying to figure out how to get back with my ex. What should I do?
Storytime about why I will never babysit ever again. So a little background information, I was 17 and a senior in high school. And my parents were super annoyed about the fact that I hadn't had a job since I was 14. So their friends just happened to need a babysitter. So they told me that I had to do it. So fast forward, I go over there super early in the morning and the mom had already left for work. And the dad, who we're gonna call Will, he was just about to leave. And before he walked out the door, he told me that there was a list of things that needed to be done before they got home. So their daughter Autumn, who was 5 years old, she was still sleeping. And I was reading through the list and it was just normal stuff like nap time at 2 o'clock, no pop after 7 o'clock, that sort of stuff. And then it had an arrow pointing towards the back. And when I flipped the page over, it said, "By the way, Autumn is scared to bathe by herself, so please get a shower with her." And I was not comfortable with that, so I called my mom and I told her about it, like for part 2. Part 2 about why I will never ever babysit ever again. So like I said, I flipped the page over and it said that their daughter was scared to bathe alone, so I would have to take a shower with her. And I called my mom and I told her about it. And she was like, "Well, honey, that doesn't sound that weird. Don't you remember when your little brother was scared of the toilet and we would have to take him to the bathroom and stand there with him for 20 minutes while he tried to go to the bathroom?" So I was super annoyed that she was even comparing those two situations. Because first of all, that was my little brother. Second of all, this is just freaking weird. So I told her to bring my bathing suit over and then I did everything on the list. Fast forward, Autumn said that she really liked me, so her parents wanted me to come over and babysit again. So I did, and whenever I was setting up the shower that day, there was a stack of towels sitting on the toilet, and when I picked it up to move it, a camera fell out of the pile of towels as soon as I picked it up, and it was recording. I was really weirded out, but I wanted to show it to my mom, so I Part 3 about why I will never ever ever babysit ever again. So like I said, I picked up the stack of towels and a camera that was recording fell out of it. And while I was home later that night, I was waiting for my mom to get home when I got a call from Will. And if you don't remember who that is, that's Autumn's dad. And of course I wasn't going to answer the phone because I was super weirded out and low-key scared. But then he left a voicemail. And he was like, "Hey, so I know you have the camera. And this is kind of awkward, but I'm gonna need it back. I can pay you whatever you want, and I would prefer that we don't tell anybody about this." Sometimes I'm just really amazed at how stupid people are because as soon as my mom got home, I showed her the camera and I let her listen to the voicemail. So my mom called over Autumn's mom. So they called the police, and Autumn's mom kept trying to call Will, but his phone was going straight to voicemail. And she was like, "Yeah, he begged me not to come over here whenever you called." It's been a week since this happened, and Autumn's dad is currently running from the cops.
Ready with me for my best friend's wedding and story time about how I got fired from a job that she got me because a guy accused me of sexually assaulting him. I guess attempted sexual assault is more like it. Obviously, my beautiful best friend is getting married today. It was actually this past weekend, but I showed up with my hair really clean. Serena and I met when we studied at the same conservatory, Stella Adler Studio of Acting in New York City. This is also where I met my husband, so we've known each other for 10 years. Guys, this was back in 2012. By the way, I completely changed my hairstyle because Serena gave me a gift basket, and in the gift basket, there was this beautiful bow on it. So I decided I needed to incorporate the bow into my hair. I went ahead and started straightening my hair, which I had washed in the morning. Look how shiny my hair looks. Shout out to my K18 shampoo for that. Back to the story. After we graduated from school, I actually did book a few roles. I got the role of playing the girlfriend of Harvey Keitel and the comedian and some other stuff. Then I got married and then I went back to New York and I had no job. Serena at the time was working for a company called S3, like the letter S and the number 3. I'm done hiding from these people, so I am calling them out. Oh, I also started curling the ends of my hair, which unfortunately the curls did not stay, but it still looked pretty. So Serena got me the job, and let me tell you, there were only men working at this office with the exception of one other woman, and Serena and me. So you can imagine it was a very misogynistic place to work at. Men would stare at us like we were Martians, but mostly because they were looking at our bodies. How beautiful does my hair look? Go to part 2. Ready with me for my bestie's wedding, plus story time about how she got me a job that I was fired from for supposedly offering a guy a BJ. Like I said in part 1, working here was weird because there were only men, except for one other woman, Serena and me. Serena is my best friend, by the way, who is getting married today. By the way, this whole filming of this process was super uncomfortable because I didn't have a really good setup, but I did my best. By the way, I tried a new foundation, the Hourglass one, and it was phenomenal. Beautiful. I ended up getting sat next to this one guy. He was the youngest guy in the office, good looking, he was really funny. Everyone told me that as soon as I started working there, this guy completely changed. He was funny, he was talking, he was making jokes. He literally looked happy at the job. Before I showed up, apparently he was not very much like that. Him and I would have really cool conversations. We would talk about movies and all that. But obviously, we're at work, so it was nothing weird. Eventually, we started talking about the women that he dated, which I would give him advice and whatever. It was nothing deep. But then one day, the manager, Gabe, he emails me and tells me that I don't need to show up for work. You guys, I almost pooped my pants. I had a bad feeling. I asked him why, and he said, "Oh, we're just not that busy today." And the following day, he asked me not to show up again. He just didn't have the balls to fire me. Part 2 is up. With me for my bestie's wedding plus story time about how I got fired from a job for supposedly sexually assaulting somebody, or attempted. Because my manager at this job called S3 did not have the balls to fire me, he actually asked Serena, my best friend, the girl who is getting married today, who I am getting ready for, he asked her to fire me. She asked me to meet her at the park, and as soon as I get there, she starts to cry. So I start to cry. Then she tells me that they fired me. And guess what? They didn't even give her a reason. I go home, I'm depressed for the next 2 weeks, I'm crying every single day. But Serena got to investigating. 2 months later, she calls me while I'm in Egypt. She tells me the truth. Apparently, the guy that I sat next to every single day at this job, by the way, his name is Justin, he invented this whole lie about how I would accost him in the kitchen at work, I would offer myself to him, and on several occasions I asked him if he wanted a BJ at work. In reality, this guy was so in love with me that he couldn't sit next to me at work every day. So he figured the best thing to do to get rid of me was to invent a lie to get me fired. By the way, the day that I got fired, I texted him and he felt so bad. He even offered me money, you guys. All the while, he was the one that got me fired. Should I sue these people? This is the final makeup look for the wedding. I love you guys. Bye.
Story time about the time that I had a thing with my stepbrother. So a little background information. I was 14 and it was the first half of my freshman year. So my dad had recently broken up with my mom and he had different girls in and out of the house 24/7. I mean, he was kind of doing his thing after a 15-year marriage. Well, the one day I'm sitting in the house and he brings this girl Kayla over. She had a few kids herself, but both of them said that they would never date. Well, I thought her son Tyler was extremely good looking. So him and I started talking over Snapchat, and things were going good for quite a while. Well, I would say a few months later, my dad told us that Kayla was coming over with her kids. And I was super confused because he seemed really nervous about it. So her kids and I were all sitting on the sofa, and they sat us down and they were like, we need to talk to you guys. We're gonna call my dad Mike. She goes, Mike and I are dating now, so we all have to get along. The reason why she said that was because she thought that I didn't get along. Part 2 about how I had a thing with my stepbrother. So like I said, my dad and her sat us down and she goes, Mike and I are dating now, da-da-da-da-da. And she was like, so we all have to get along now. Because she thought that I didn't get along with some of her kids and her kids did not respect my dad at all. So like I said, Tyler and I were dating at this point. And I freaked out. I was like, you guys can't start dating because Tyler and I are dating. And Kayla was like, well, that's too bad. You two need to break up because I'm your new mother now. And I'm sitting there like, what the fuck did this bitch say? So I start screaming that it's not fair. Tyler's trying to calm me down. My dad is trying to calm Kayla down. To be honest, my dad didn't really care because I had told him about Tyler and I before the whole situation. I thought Tyler would be really upset at the situation, but he was actually pissed off at his mom. So we broke up. Kayla and my dad dated for a little bit over 2 months. Well, surprise, surprise, Kayla cheated on my dad with her ex. So Tyler and I started dating again. Story time about the girl who left me unconscious in the girls' bathroom. So a little background information. I was pretty young at the time. I was in 7th grade and I was 11 years old. And there was this girl who we're gonna call Jenna. Jenna hated me for absolutely no fucking reason. She would bully me because I had red hair and she would text me literally every day at the same time telling me to off myself and how I was weird and how nobody liked me. One day she randomly started being nice to me. She sat with me at lunch and her water bottle was empty. And she asked if I needed mine filled up too. Stupidly, I said yes. Well, she ended up putting drugs in my water bottle. After like 20 minutes, I started feeling sick, so I went to the bathroom. And I was kneeling over the toilet when everything went black. Well, when I didn't come back from the bathroom, my teacher got worried, so she sent security looking for me. They were banging on my stall. Obviously, I was fucking unconscious, so I didn't answer. So then they called the fire department, the police, the ambulance were all there. Like for part 2 about the girl who left me unconscious in the girls' bathroom. So like I said, the fire department was there, the police, the ambulance. They called the fire department because they couldn't get the door off. And when they removed it, it fell on me. So I was injured and unconscious. And just a little background information on this girl, who, mind you, was literally 11 years old. She had a 3 criminal record and was recently in prison for 5 days, or juvie, whatever the heck you want to call it, because she brought a knife to school and tried to stab some kid who had called her fat the day before. Anyways, back to the story. I wake up 4 days later. My mom's sitting next to me. They put Abby in jail for 13 years. For suspicion of attempted murder, and she was kicked out of school. And now I'm homeschooled and failing all my classes. I now have seizures because of the drugs that she gave me. So yeah.
Story time about how I ghosted my girlfriend for her sister. Disclaimer is not my story time, and send me on Instagram. I, a 24-year-old male, am an asshole. But to be honest, I don't think I can help it. I met my girlfriend in college at a party and we hit it off right away. I asked her to be my girlfriend the very same week I met her. So things moved along really quick. We were dating for 3 months before I met her parents. And I went over to her house and we did the whole thing. But when I met her sister, I fell in love. Her sister was like the male version of me. She likes dirt biking. I like dirt biking. She loves going on solo trips. I do too. We both love skydiving, playing baseball, watching baseball, and my girlfriend, well, she just doesn't have those interests. She's more into getting manicures and pedicures, coloring her hair, making sure she looks skinny in all her pictures, and she always makes me take about 100 pictures before she chooses one to post. So I realized her sister and I were much more compatible. The same day we met, her and I just talked for about 3 hours, while the rest of the family was watching TV. That very same day, she invited me to go on a hike with her and her friends. My girlfriend was actually really happy that her sister and I got along. So I said yes, only to end up making out with her. Part 2 is story time about how I ghosted my girlfriend for her sister. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, instead of me on Instagram. While my girlfriend was blackout drunk on her bed, her sister and I were making out in the kitchen. I know, I'm an evil man, but I just couldn't help it. That's when I realized that I had fallen in love with my girlfriend's sister over the last 2 weeks. I couldn't believe it myself. That's when I decided to tell her in the kitchen that I couldn't see her sister the same way anymore, and that I kind of wanted to be with her. She told me there was no way that could ever happen and that she would never do that to her sister. Yet she was still making out with her sister's boyfriend. I asked her to tell me how she felt about me, and she basically told me she felt the same way. So over the next few days, I made a decision. I decided to ghost my girlfriend. I didn't have the balls to tell her that I had fallen in love with her sister. I mean, can you blame me? Of course, my girlfriend went nuts trying to contact me, so I ended up blocking her number. She came over to my apartment, but I didn't answer the door. That's when I called her sister up and told her that I was single. But now she's rejecting me and doesn't want to be in a relationship with me. I feel like an asshole because I ghosted my girlfriend and I fell in love with her sister. Now I'm the one ending up alone. Should I get back with my girlfriend, or should I try to get with the sister? Story time about how I ghosted my girlfriend for her sister. Disclaimer, it's not my story time, instead of me on Instagram. When she invited me to go hiking, I instantly had to say yes. But in my defense, I tried to convince my girlfriend to come with us. She said no because she didn't want to get sweaty and she didn't want to ruin her hair. So her sister and I made our way to the hiking place with her 2 friends. During the hike, we had so much fun. Her and I basically walked together for 2 hours and just talked. The longer we walked, the more I fell in love with her. And I could tell that the same was happening to her. We decided to walk ahead of her friends just to get some more privacy. And that's when we started making out. Then she instantly started to cry. She felt really bad for her sister. And I felt bad for her sister. But there was just nothing we could do about it. At least not then. When we got back to her parents' house, we decided not to talk about it or even talk to each other. My girlfriend and I went back to college and I didn't see her sister for another 2 weeks. She finally came over to visit and we decided to go to a house party. And this is when things get even more complicated. At the house party, my girlfriend decided to get really drunk. And she was being a brat. So her sister and I had to take care of her the whole night. When we finally took her back home after she was sick, her sister and I started making out again. Part 3 is up.
Story time about how my mom got with my sister's boyfriend. So a little background information. I was 13 and in 8th grade, and my sister was a senior in high school and she was 17. And my sister always had a new boyfriend. Like after 3 months of dating somebody, they would break up and then she would be with a new guy a month later. And this started whenever she was a sophomore. So yeah, she had a lot of boyfriends. Anyway, so she had started dating this boy, and we're gonna call him Ben. Well, lucky for Ben, whenever they started dating was right around the time when we were supposed to go on our vacation that we take every year. So my mom and dad said that he could come with us. So my sister, who we're gonna call Emily, she decided to bring Ben, and I decided to bring one of my friends, Carly. We drove down, everything was good for the first 2 days, and usually what would happen on this vacation is my dad would end up staying at the hotel and doing work while we were all out doing stuff. So my mom, Ben, and Emily were all out drinking at the bar 24/7. Like for part 2. Part 2 about how my mom got with my sister's boyfriend. So like I said, Emily, Ben, and my mom were out drinking 24/7 at the bar. And since this was a vacation that we took every year, my sister already knew a bunch of people down there. The one night my mom started feeling really sick at the bar, so Ben offered to take her back to the hotel. And at this time, my friend, my dad, and I were all down at the buffet in the hotel. So Ben took my mom upstairs to our hotel room, and my dad was like, "Oh, do you guys want to walk down to the fair?" We said yes, so he told us to go upstairs and get his wallet. So my friend and I go up in the elevator to our room, and I want to say this was about 20 or 30 minutes after Ben and my mom had went upstairs. So we get into the room, we hear the shower running, which was weird because we didn't think anybody was there. So instead of me calling my dad because it might have been a murderer, I go, and the door slightly creaked open, so I look through the door, and obviously I could hear you know what, but hers and his clothes were on the floor. Like for part 3. Story time about how my boyfriend and best friend were sneaking around behind my back. So a little background information, I was 15 and in 10th grade. So my mom and dad were split up and I was pretty much allowed to do whatever I wanted because of that. So I was dating this boy named Jacob. Well, my best friend Alice literally hated him. Like low-key, every once in a while, she would try to break him and I up. And when I would call her out on it, she would just deny it. Anyway, so the one day I didn't go to school because I was super sick. So the whole day I was trying to text Jacob and Allison, but nobody was answering me. Which was extremely weird because no matter what, Allison would always text me back. So after I knew the school ended, I went to Allison's house. Nobody was answering the door, so I used the spare key. I walk in and all I hear is a very loud banging coming from her bedroom. So I walk in, I see my boyfriend and her together, and then he starts saying that she drugged him. So I went on his phone, I see a bunch of old text messages between him and her, and them exchanging pictures. And then sis wants to start giving me an attitude, so I punched her in the face, and then I left and I don't talk to either of them. Story time about how I almost got kidnapped by my online boyfriend. So a little background information, I was 16 and in 11th grade. So a year before this all happened, I posted a picture on Instagram saying, add me on Snapchat if you want to be friends. Yes, I was that person. Anyway, so this really cute guy adds me on Snapchat. And after about 3 months talking, he said that he wants to meet me in person. And he didn't sound sus at all, so I was like, sure. So we met at this park that was like 30 minutes away. And we met there around 6 o'clock, so when the sun was setting. And he was super nice. It was super romantic. Well, then we went to his house. We watched a movie and we did the nasty. So after that, he asked me if I want a drink. And what I could have swore was 20 minutes later, I wake up in an abandoned farm shed with no clothes or anything. So I start screaming my head off. I don't have my phone or anything, so I start to run. And then he grabs me. He says, if you try to run or you try to scream, I am going to kill you. Like for part 2 about how I almost got kidnapped by my online boyfriend. So like I said, I wake up in this abandoned farm shed. I don't have no clothes. I don't have a phone. So I try to run and he grabs me. He says that if you run, I will kill you. So I was like, okay, fine. What do you want from me? So he starts putting on lingerie and tells me to also put some on so we can take pictures together. What the actual you know what? So after that, he starts crying and he starts telling me his whole life story and how he's not who I think he is. Turns out that he's 32 and he just goes online pretending that he's 17 years old. So I just try to comfort him, right? It ends up working. He brings me my clothes, tells me to run, or else he's going to, once again, kill me. So I run, I go to this gas station, get picked up by the police, find my parents. Luckily for me, I paid attention to where everything was. He was arrested.
Storytime about how a strange man abused me because I did not want to give him my phone number. Disclaimer, is not my story time. I sent him on Instagram. That's when he slid his hand onto my lap. I quickly get up from the table and ask him to leave. That's when he said, why are you freaking out? I'm just trying to get your number. Then I told him that there was absolutely zero chance I would ever give him my phone number. And he said, oh, you think you have a choice? And he holds out his phone so that I could type in my number. I pushed his phone back and again asked him to leave. He threatened me and said that he wouldn't leave until I gave him my number. My knees and hands were shaking. Look back at my employees behind the counter and they are scared. That's when one of my employees says, I'm gonna call the cops. And I said, yes, call them. As soon as I turned back to this man, he swings at me. He wasn't able to reach my face, but then he grabbed me by the shoulders and pushed me down onto the ground. This all happened in about 30 seconds. As I'm on the ground, he starts slapping me. I covered my face with my arms and I just started kicking at him. And my 2 female employees, who by the way are like 17 and 18, start attacking the guy. And then he starts hitting them. Thankfully, 2 men from the street hear me yelling. I came in and tackled him and the police arrived 2 minutes later. I found out this guy was stalking me for a month. I got a restraining order. Be careful out there. Storytime about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I come from a really big family. My mom has 5 sisters and 1 brother, and my dad has 4 brothers and sisters. All of them have their own kids, so I have a lot of cousins. And this means we have a lot of family get-togethers. Every single weekend, someone is hosting a party. We all get together and eat, and it's actually a really nice time. But there's always that one creepy uncle. In my case, it's my mom's brother. He's 46-year-old and has never married, but he's a bachelor. He's got money, so he basically has a bunch of sugar babies. Whenever my family tells him that he needs to get married, he says he'll never get married to anybody. He thinks women only exist for the pleasure of men. When I turned 16, I noticed that he would stare at me a lot. At first, it was just staring. Every now and again, he never did anything really creepy then, but just the staring was enough for me. I never told my mom about it then, not until I turned 18. This is when he started making comments like, wow, you're growing into your body, or wow, you got great hips. He would make comments about how I was growing up, like, Ew. He even told my dad that he needed to keep me away from guys because I was growing up really quickly. And because of my curves, men would think that I was a woman. This is when I finally told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable. She thought it was funny at first, so I avoided him at all costs. Part 2. Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's me on Instagram. When I told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable, she laughed it off. She thought it was funny. She said, oh, you know how he is. So from that point on, I basically avoided my uncle every time we were at a family event. When I turned 20, this is when things got even worse. He would ask me things like if I was a virgin or if I had a boyfriend, if I had ever been on dates. And one time he even told me that he would get very jealous if I ended up bringing a guy to one of our family events. One time he complimented me on the dress that I was wearing. So after that, I only wore baggy clothes to family events. The fact that I had to change the way that I dress so that he could control himself makes me sick. I finally told my mom again that my uncle was always bothering me. It's when she told me that the world is filled with men like him and that all I needed to do was just ignore him. So I told my dad everything. My dad took it a little more seriously and told my uncle that he needed to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed. Part 3 is up. Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's me on Instagram. I finally told my dad and he told my uncle to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed and told my dad that he was overreacting. And that all he said to me was that I was a pretty girl. What a liar. In part 1 and 2, I told you guys that it was getting worse, but here's where it actually gets even worse. Like I said, I have a really big family, so my cousins are growing up too. One of them just turned 13 and my uncle cannot stop staring at her. She's maturing a lot quicker than most 13-year-olds. He's already staring at her. So here's what I did. At the next family event, I sat right next to him. Every time he would stare at one of my cousins or try to make a comment at me, I called him out for it in front of everybody. I even recorded the things that he said. The fact that I even have to do this at a family event makes me sick. Instead of enjoying my time with my family, I have to sit next to my creepy uncle policing him. Anyway, it's totally worth it though. I'm making sure that my cousins don't feel uncomfortable. After I had enough recordings of him saying nasty things, at the next family event, I showed it to my grandma. I basically played it for the entire family. My grandma told him that he couldn't come to any more events if he was going to behave that way. And of course, he apologized to everyone right away. But not to me, he apologized to my dad. After his half-ass apology, he was let back into family events. I don't think that's enough punishment. Give me some ideas because I think I deserve justice. Creepy uncle. Story time about how my asshole boyfriend criticizes everything I wear. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. My boyfriend and I have been dating for 6 months. We're both pretty young. I'm 19 and he's 22. I could say that he's just young and he doesn't know how to treat a woman yet, but he's pretty immature in everything else. Now you might wonder why I'm with him. It's because I love him. I met him when I was 15 in high school and I've been in love with him ever since. He always used to tell me that I was too young for him, but finally when I turned 18, he started paying attention to me. I begged him to go on a date with me and he finally said yes. At first, everything was so amazing. He was fun, charismatic, and super affectionate. When he finally asked me to be his girlfriend, I was so happy. But then slowly he started criticizing everything I wear. He doesn't like when I wear hoodies or sweaters, leggings or pants, skirts that are too short, skirts that are too loose, or crop tops. First he would politely say things, but now he's just straight up mean about it. He told me when I'm around him I can wear skimpy clothes, but when we go out he wants me to wear stuff that's loose. So I literally changed everything I wore. I dressed only for him and I started hating myself. Part 2 of how my boyfriend criticizes everything I wear. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I completely changed the way I dress just for him. He would always find something to criticize, even down to the jewelry or hair accessories or makeup that I wore. It got to the point where if I went shopping, I would send him pictures of the stuff that I wanted to buy for him to approve. Even my nails. Anytime I went to the nail salon, I would have to send him pictures of the nail polish or any designs I wanted to do. And don't think that he's paying for stuff. No, he's not. I finally opened up to my mom and told her everything. She told my dad and they both got really upset. My dad even called my boyfriend and told him to come over. My parents told him to stop being so controlling, otherwise the relationship would be over. Of course, my boyfriend pretended to be on his best behavior, apologized and said that he wouldn't do it anymore. But when we left my parents' house, he told me I was a snitch. Then he made me promise to never tell my parents anything about our relationship again. And I know I should just break up with him, but I do love him. I've been in love with him for years and now that I'm with him, I don't want to lose him. But I know that I've put him up on a pedestal. It's been a few weeks since my parents intervened, but my boyfriend hasn't changed a thing. I decided to buy myself a designer purse that I've been wanting for years. As soon as he saw me with the purse, he said that my privilege was showing and that I needed to go return it as soon as possible because it was embarrassing. Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how my boyfriend criticizes everything I wear. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's sending me on Instagram. After he told me to return the designer purse, I said no. He then explained to me why I should be embarrassed to wear it. He said people that buy designer stuff are only trying to flaunt their wealth, and that people who do that are just trying to cover up their shortcomings. So basically, I'm trying to hide the fact that I'm not good at other things, or that I don't have good qualities. I couldn't believe what he was saying to me. For the first time ever, I defended myself and I told him he needed to leave me alone. And no, I didn't return the purse, and I'm not trying to flaunt my wealth either. So here's what I did. I started returning returning all the clothes that I bought just to wear for him and the ones he wants me to wear in front of other people. When he saw me again, he told me that I looked terrible. He said no one would take me seriously in my outfit with my designer purse. So I drove him back to his house because no, he doesn't have a car, and I've been ignoring his calls and messages for 4 days. My plan is to start treating him the way he treated me. I'm going to control and criticize everything he wears and see how he likes it. I think this is going to make things better. I don't want to break up with him because I do love him. What do you guys think? Storytime about how I'm still engaged after 16 years. My fiance asked me to marry him when I was 20 years old and I am now 36. It's been that long. Disclaimer, this is not my story time of sending me an Instagram. Let's call my fiance Ted. Ted is a great guy aside from the fact that he pushes back our wedding day all the time. A little backstory. We are both very career-driven people. We both work very hard and travel for our jobs. He works on Wall Street and I work for a beauty conglomerate. We're very wealthy, so we could be having kids right now if we wanted to. But of course, he says that we should wait until we get married. Every time I bring up the fact that we still haven't gotten married after 16 years, he gets annoyed and upset. Worst of all, we barely spend time together because we both work so much. I have to interrupt. This foundation is amazing, you guys. Where are my pores? It's from the brand Assam Beauty and it is cruelty-free. I don't think my skin has ever looked this good in makeup. Back to the story. I started getting really suspicious because of how many times he's pushed back the wedding. So I decided to do some research. When we first got engaged, he told me the ring was worth $45,000. I got it appraised and it turns out it's a fake ring and it's only worth $200. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I'm still engaged after 16 years. After I found out the ring was fake, I came up with a plan to confront my fiance. I made sure to get home earlier than he did. When he came into the apartment, I was standing right by our balcony. He comes over to me and gives me a kiss. Then I take off the engagement ring and I throw it over the balcony. He pretended like he was freaking out. That's when I told him I got the ring appraised and that it was a fake, and that it was only worth $200 instead of the $45,000 he told me he spent. The man was too stunned to speak. I could tell he was trying to come up with some lie in his head, so I gave him a minute to think. Then he says that he bought the ring from a friend who is a jeweler, and that he must have scammed him out of the $45,000. After 45 minutes of arguing, I was exhausted. I decided to go to sleep. I woke up a few hours later and I overhear him on the phone. That's when I heard him say she knows that the ring is fake and I think she knows about us. Part 3 is up. This palette is also from Assam Beauty and it's cruelty-free. These shadows blend like a dream. Go to part 3. Part 3 of how I'm still engaged after 16 years. That's when I hear my fiance on the phone saying I think she knows about us. My heart sank to my stomach. I stood there and listened to the rest of the conversation. He was whispering so it was hard to make out. All I could hear was I'll have to tell her the truth now. I went back to our room and pretended to be asleep. He comes in and wakes me up and tells me that he has to talk to me. That's when he starts telling me everything. He said when he asked me to marry me, he had every intention of doing so. But the more he traveled, the further he felt away from me. That's when he told me he met someone in his travels and that he'd been seeing this woman for 10 years. He even had a house with her in a different city. It turns out that every time he would travel, it was only to see her. My world was completely shattered. Worst of all is that he was so happy after he told me. He moved out that week and now I am totally alone. I gave him the best years of my life and my time was totally wasted. I feel like he should be punished for this, but I don't think he broke any laws. What should I do? The mascara and lip balm are also from Assam Beauty. How good does my skin look? Bye! Okay, so here's a little story time, but it's a little TMI. So I'm really sensitive to like smells. If I smell bad, I know it. And if other people smell bad, I know it. And it bothers me so much. So I was filming a movie in Waco, Texas, and everything was fine. But a few days into the shoot, I started noticing that my armpits were smelling like rotten fruit. It's hard to describe how I smell. I can only compare it to guava. It bothered me so much. The next day I went to wardrobe and started sniffing all the clothes that I had worn the day before, and it all smelled like guava. So I went and picked up the Kopari deodorant. This is a coconut deodorant and it smells so good. When I was doing my research, I realized that this is like skincare for your armpits, and I use skincare on my face and my body. Why don't I do it on my armpits? It's also free of aluminum, baking soda, and it's 100% plant-based. I don't smell like guava anymore, thank God. If you have any embarrassing BO story times, let me know in the comments because I don't want to be the only one.
Story time about how I found out that my boyfriend was trying to get with another girl on Valentine's Day. Okay, there's a lot that goes into this story time, so let me break it down for you real quick. I was a sophomore and my boyfriend and I had been dating for about 4 months now. And he was a junior. Well, there was this girl that he was for some reason obsessed with in his Spanish class. She was a freshman. And I know you're probably thinking, oh, well, how did you know he was obsessed with her? Well, he would Snapchat this girl 24/7. Even his friends told me he was obsessed with her. So I talked to him and I told him I was uncomfortable with how much he was talking to this girl. And he said, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I'll block her. Now, I didn't ask him to do that, but it made me feel more confident in how he felt about me. Well, Valentine's Day comes around, and we didn't talk all day until he came to pick me up. I wished him a happy Valentine's Day and got left undelivered. So we get to the restaurants, and we decide to put our phones at the end of the table so that way we would be more focused on each other. Well, he goes to the bathroom, and then I see this name pop up on his phone. Like for part 2.
Part 2. So, like I said, I saw this name on his phone, and there was something special about this name. So, whenever I kept streaks, I would put the word streak, and then an emoji, and then the person's name. And he got the idea that instead of keeping her name, he would put it as streak. So I was like, that's really fucking weird. And at first I was like, what the fuck? So I opened his phone, and what do you know? It's from that girl. And she was replying back to a big paragraph that he sent her. And we had school that same day. So at 6:30 in the morning, this girl got a big paragraph from my boyfriend about how she's such a beautiful, amazing girl, and that she deserves somebody who's gonna take her out and buy her flowers and stuff. And how if she wanted to go out to dinner, let him know. He took an extremely long time in the bathroom, so the waiter came to our table. So I ordered $300 worth of food for myself. So when he came back, I told him that I had to go call my mom, and I left. And he was stuck with a $400 bill.
Story time about my worst trip off LSD. So one of the kids in my friend group was about to leave for Arizona. And we would always talk about how we need to trip together before he leaves. And anytime that I would trip off acid, I would go to my one plug. Well, he ran out, so we had to go to somebody else. And I've never tried this kid's stuff before. I just said, fuck it, YOLO. Which should not have been my motto at the time. But it was. So that night, we're in the car, and one of our friends is driving because he's sober, obviously. And before I put the tab on my tongue, I started to get really nervous. And I have never felt like that before I've taken acid. But I kind of just said fuck it, and I put it on my tongue. So we go pick up 2 more people that I'm not really close with. So then we make our way over to our other friend's apartment. And I'm kind of feeling it, but not really. But then as soon as we walk into that apartment, I start tripping balls. And you know, everything was going good. But then my dumb ass decided to look in the fucking mirror. And as soon as I look in the mirror, I see myself smile back at me, like for part 2. Okay, part 2. So like I said, I look in the mirror and I see myself smiling back at me. And that's whenever everything went south so quick. I sat on the bed, tried to pull myself together because I didn't want to make a fucking scene in front of everybody. But then I got caught in this fucking loop. And if you don't know what the loop is, then I'm going to tell you what it is. It's basically where you feel like you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. And then I started looking around at everybody and it looked like their faces were melting. One of my friends got up off his chair, walked to the other side of the room, and I watched him do that. But when I looked back over at the fucking chair, he was still sitting there. So I looked at my one friend that was sober, who I was actually really close with, and I think he saw the look in my eye and he was like, do you want to leave now? And I just shook my head, yeah, like I could not deal with that shit anymore. So we go to his car and then we drive to my boyfriend's house. Because I could not go home. I would have got crucified. Well, we get in the house and as soon as his mom sees me, she knows that something's wrong. Like for part 3.
Okay, part 3. So like I said, I walked in and she knew that something was wrong with me right away. Because she was like, oh, I have a letter from your boyfriend. And usually I would run up, grab it, read it really quickly. Because I would only get like 1 letter a week. But instead I ran downstairs because her face was fucking melting. So 5 minutes later, she has to come downstairs and help me get dressed into my pajamas because I forgot how to dress myself. I didn't want to be left alone that night, so my friend stayed in the basement with me. So he went and tried to go to sleep. But he couldn't because I was watching Butterfly Effect for 8 hours straight. Like, that was the only thing that could calm me down. But I still don't even know all the freaking words to it, which is weird. Like, he would try to change the video and somehow I end up back to Butterfly Effect. And then he tried to kiss me. So he left the next morning because he had to go to work, which was at like 11 a.m. And I took this tab at 8 p.m. the day before. So I was getting texts like, where are you? You're supposed to be home now. So I had to go home and act normal in front of everybody while I'm still tripping balls. And I also got grounded for coming home late because I could not come home at the right time because I was tripping so hard. And this lasted for about 24 hours. Crazy story time about how my mom kidnapped my sister. So my mom and dad split whenever I was really young. And at this time, they were always in and out of court battling for custody over my sister and I. Well, the one day my dad drives my mom downtown to the courthouse because she didn't have a ride. And before she gets out of the car, she's like, can I give the girls a hug? And my dad was like, yeah, go ahead. Little background information. I was more of a daddy's girl. My sister was more of a mommy's girl. Which is probably the reason why she took her. I was sitting by the window, my sister was sitting in the middle seat. So she gives me a hug. Next thing I know, my sister's seatbelt was unbuckled and my mom was running across the street with her in the middle of downtown. Didn't even look for cars. So my dad got out of the car, ran over, grabbed her, picked both of them up and walked over to the sidewalk and my mom was screaming bloody murder. So this guy called the cops and my dad was trying to show them custody papers because he had full custody. But the cop knew my mom so he let her take my sister. We got her back but I didn't see this bitch for like 4 months. Toxic best friend story time. So I had an off and on friendship with this one girl. In my freshman year, we became friends again.
and she had this boyfriend named Nicholas, and they literally fought 24/7. And every time she would fight, she would be like, "Can you please fix this for me?" So she would have me add him on Snapchat, fix it, and then block him. And guys, this literally was happening like 5 times a week. And then after she asked me to do that the first few times, I realized she started going through my phone. And when I say my phone, I mean my whole motherfucking phone. A bitch was going through my Snapchats, DMs, text messages, and I didn't know how to confront her because that's just weird. So the one day I was getting ready at her house because we were about to go out, and she was like, "I'm grounded, can I use your phone real quick?" And I was like, "Yeah, just let me Snapchat this last person back." And she goes, "No," and rips the phone out of my hand. And she starts going through my Snapchat right in front of me. And I had a streak with this kid named Nick. She goes up to me and says, "What the fuck is this?" Like for part 2. About how I stole my best friend's boyfriend. So a little background information, I was 14 and in 8th grade. And we're going to call my best friend Ashley. Ashley was really nice at first. She always had my back when I needed her. But then out of nowhere, she started being super rude to me. She turned into one of those pick-me girls that would always make fun of you in front of other guys, talk crap about you to the guy that you liked. Well, the one day I hear her talking shit about me whenever we were in class. And everybody could hear her. She was literally on the whole other side of the class. And I asked her, "Hey, like, why were you talking about me?" She was like, "No, I was talking about a different girl." And I had a pretty unique name, so I was like, who else in the school could you have been talking about? But I just brushed it off. Well, then we were in algebra class and I heard her talking shit about me again. How I do my makeup so bad and I can never get a boyfriend, like I'm so ugly and all that stuff. Well, she thought that I wasn't mad at her, so she came up to me the one day and was like, "OMG, I have a boyfriend." Like for part 2. Part 2 about how I stole my best friend's boyfriend. So like I said, she would talk shit about me all the time, and I only confronted her that one time, so she thought that we were all good. So the one day before class starts, she runs up to me, she's like, "Oh my god, you'll never guess what? I have a boyfriend." She's like, "He's so cute, he's really popular, he's on the football team." And I was like, "Girl, whatever, nobody cares." Until I'm sitting in my first class of the day and I remember that she made out with my boyfriend last year. I forgave her, of course. But because karma was taking a little bit too long, I figured I had to do something about it myself. So my plan was to hook up with her boyfriend. Do I feel bad about it? Absolutely not. So I went to my school's football game, and guess who I saw? My best friend's boyfriend. She couldn't make it that night, she had something to do, so I had him all to myself. So I went up to him, I started flirting with him, and I was like, "Oh, you should break up with your girlfriend and date me instead." But then he was like, "I thought you guys were best friends and I would never date you." Like for part 3 about how I stole my best friend's boyfriend. So like I said, I went to the football game. She wasn't there because she had something else to do. I went up to him. I started flirting. I told him that he should break up with her and date me instead. And I also said that she was a bitch and a whole bunch of other stuff. And he was like, "Why would you say that about your best friend?" And he was like, "I would never date you." And I had a feeling this would happen. So I had photoshopped a picture of her and this guy that she sits next to in her lab class. And I showed it to him and I was like, "See, she's cheating on you." So he was pissed off. He gave me his number. And the next day he came over to my house. We cuddled, watched movies, we kissed. After 3 months, Ashley found out. We hadn't talked to each other since then, but now I am 16 in 10th grade and still with her ex-boyfriend. Funny thing though, the picture that I photoshopped with her and that guy, she's literally dating him now. So you're welcome, I guess. But anyway, she still goes around talking shit on me. I mean, who can blame her? I did steal. Story time about how my best friend waxed off my eyebrow in my sleep, so I cut her hair. So a little background information. I was 14 and in 8th grade, and my best friends and I were having a sleepover. And right before we had went to sleep, we were all talking about this one TikTok trend that was going around. It's like this trend where girls would go and put wax on their boyfriends while they were sleeping and then take it off. Well, I didn't think anything of it, so that night I went to sleep. I should have knew this was gonna happen because I'm always the butt of the joke whenever it comes to our friend group. Like, I'm always the one getting picked on. Like, there was this one thing that my friend Ashley saw online. It was like, if you put white nail polish on your teeth, it would make your teeth whiter. So who did they decide to try it out on? Yup, me. And yes, I could have said no, but these were my best friends. I didn't think that they would intentionally hurt me. Anyway, so like I said, I go to sleep and all of a sudden I wake up in the middle of the night to something very, very, very hot on my face. I open my eyes and all of my friends are standing above me with their flashlights on. Like for part 2. Part
Part 2 about how my best friend waxed off my eyebrow while I was asleep, so I cut her hair. So like I said, went to sleep, didn't think anything was gonna happen, and then I wake up and all of them are standing above me with their flashlights on. And then I realized that Ashley has a stick in her hand. Once I realized that there was wax on the other end of the stick, I started screaming. So then Kelsey decides to cover my mouth. She's like, shh, it's not that bad, I promise, like, don't worry. I get up real quick, I run to the bathroom, and there's like this pink transparent wax on my eyebrow. It was about 3 a.m. and we're all sitting there trying to find ways to get this wax off of my fucking eyebrow. Well, then Amber goes, I'm tired of this, grabs it and rips it off my forehead. So I'm crying at this point. Like, I'm in 8th grade, I'm about to have my glow up, and y'all gotta ruin it with taking my eyebrow off. So nobody went to sleep for the rest of the night because they thought that I was gonna do something to them. So I acted all cool. I was like, no, it's fine, I can just draw it on. When in reality, I was going to cut this bitch's hair. Like for part 3. Part 3 about how my best friend waxed off my eyebrow in my sleep, so I cut her hair. So like I said, nobody went to sleep for the rest of the night. I acted like it was okay because I was plotting in my head that I was going to cut one of their fucking ponytails off. So I go over to their house next week, and every single day that week they were telling me how good my drawn on eyebrow looked. It didn't actually look good, and none of my hairs were growing back. So around 12 o'clock, all of us are ready to go to bed. I'm laying down, pretending that I'm sleeping, and they think I'm sleeping, so they're over there talking shit about me on her bed, Ashley's bed. I wasn't sure which one's eyebrow I should rip off because the one ripped off my eyebrow, but then the other one put the wax on my eyebrow. They were like, she's sleeping, I don't think she's gonna do anything. She doesn't even have the balls to do anything. So around 4 in the morning, everybody is dead asleep. I get up, and Ashley had her hair in a ponytail. So that was easy enough. I grabbed a pair of scissors out of my book bag, and I cut her hair off.
My boyfriend confessed to me that he's attracted to my best friend. Should I leave him? Disclaimer's not my story time. Send me an Instagram. I know you guys are gonna all say yes immediately, but hear me out. My boyfriend and I have been dating for 6 months. My best friend and I actually met him at a bar. That night, I never expected that he would ever come after me. I consider my best friend the prettier of the two of us, so I'm used to her getting hit on instead of me. But that night, my boyfriend came to me. He talked to me pretty much the entire night, and my best friend told me to go for it. So I did. He and I spent the night together, and after that, we were inseparable. To the point where he wanted me to move in with him after 2 months. My parents thought I was absolutely crazy and they didn't want me to move in with him, but I did anyway. I come from a Latino family, so this was absolutely reprehensible. I went against my family's wishes and they actually stopped speaking to me for a little bit, but luckily I got them back. My boyfriend during that time gave me all his support. He told me that my family would come around eventually and that they would see that we were in love. So living together was the logical next step. After 3 months of living together, I knew that I wanted to marry him, and he would talk about marriage all the time. He asked me what kind of ring I would want and what I would want for the proposal. We even started talking about our honeymoon. I was also starting to get in the best shape of my life. I was looking super snatched. My boyfriend told me that he loved the way that I look, but that he didn't want me to get skinny. Again, I just felt like he was supporting me and loving me. Around this time, my best friend started dating somebody. After a few weeks, they got really serious about the relationship. And of course, we went on double dates. After the 3rd double date, I noticed that my boyfriend was getting a little annoyed. I got the feeling he was jealous of my best friend's boyfriend. Follow for part 2. My boyfriend confessed to me that he's attracted to my best friend. Should I leave him? Disclaimer's not my story time. Send me an Instagram. I asked him if he was jealous of my best friend's boyfriend, and that's when he said no. But every time we would go on double dates, he would get in such a bad mood. 3 weeks ago, my best friend told me that she was moving in with her boyfriend. And when I told my boyfriend that they were moving in, his face almost went green. I asked him what was wrong and he said nothing. After that, he went into the bathroom and didn't come out for 40 minutes. Again, I asked him if he was okay and he said yeah. And I sat him down and asked him to be honest with me. That's when he said, I'm attracted to your best friend. Instantly started to cry because I had already been suspecting it. He explained to me that he didn't have any feelings for her until she got a boyfriend, and that he felt that he had some sort of ownership over her. Before my best friend got a boyfriend, the 3 of us would hang out a lot. And not once then did I ever get a feeling that he was attracted to her. He told me that he would never act on his feelings, but he didn't want to go on any more double dates. I asked him if he wanted to be with her instead of me, and he said absolutely not. He said that I was the love of his life and that attraction only meant attraction, that he didn't have feelings for her. A few days later, he took me to the most expensive restaurant in our city and asked me to marry him. But I didn't know what to say. I can't stop thinking that he's attracted to my best friend. Part 3 is up. My boyfriend confessed to me that he's attracted to my best friend. What should I do? Disclaimer is not my story time. Sending me on Instagram. After he proposed, I told him I didn't know what to say. He told me to think it over. I finally decided to tell my best friend what my boyfriend had told me. But he had confessed that he was attracted to her. First she laughed. I told her no. I'm serious. He confessed that he's attracted to you. That's when she told me I needed to break up with him. That's when I told her that he had also proposed. And she said, well then you really need to break up with him now. That's when she told me that she didn't want me to resent her and that it was completely out of her control. And I didn't. I promised her that I would never resent her for my boyfriend being attracted to her. It's not like she ever did anything on purpose to make him feel attracted. She also told me that marrying him right now would be rushing into it, and she's kind of right. We've only really known each other for 6 months. Then she told me that she's never gotten the feeling that he's attracted to her. She's never caught him looking at her or anything like that. So now her theory is that he's looking for an easy way out, and that he probably wants me to break up with him. But my boyfriend is still sweet and super affectionate. He's constantly showering me with love. My best friend thinks that if I stay with him, our relationship will suffer. I've known my best friend longer. What should I do? Storytime about how my fiance is refusing to help me plan our wedding. Should I leave him? Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I'm so sad about the palette. My fiance and I met a few years ago through friends. When we first met each other, I had a really bad first impression of him. First off, he was completely up himself. All he did was talk about himself and never once asked me questions. We were surrounded by other people, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt when he asked me out. I said yes, but our first date was kind of the same. He only really talked about himself, his career, the things he likes to do, his favorite foods, his family, his dog. I eventually just started volunteering information because he wouldn't really ask me. After our date, I didn't speak to him for a full 2 weeks. I was really turned off by his attitude, but then he messaged me saying that he was really nervous and that he realizes that he probably could have been a little more talkative. I said, yeah, you could have been. I told him how I really felt and he did apologize and he asked me out to dinner again. This time I invited him to my apartment and he made us a full 4-course meal. By the way, he's a chef. Obviously, that night, I completely fell in love with him. He made all of my favorite foods, but the gourmet version. A few months later, we became boyfriend and girlfriend. There were still a few things that I didn't like about him, though. Like, he never really had anything to talk about other than himself. Exactly a year after we met, he decided to propose, and I said yes. But when I asked him to do things for the wedding, he says no. Part 2 is up. Story time about how my fiance is refusing to help me plan our wedding. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I said I'm on Instagram. To be honest, when he asked me to marry him, I was totally blindsided. Honestly, felt like our relationship was starting to get stale. So when he asked me to marry him, I was like, for real? He told me that I was the first person who ever made him feel important. And looking back, I realized that it's because he only talked about himself and I really let him talk about only himself. Anyway, I immediately said yes out of the excitement. But when I called my mom to tell her, I was actually crying, which is like, okay, maybe I shouldn't marry him then. A few weeks into our engagement, we hadn't talked about planning at all. So I decided to ask him, like, what do you want the wedding to be like? That's when he told me that he didn't really care, but that he would just give me money for it. I mean, on one hand, that makes me really happy because I don't want my parents to have to pay for the wedding, and he has a lot of money. But on the other hand, I want him to be involved, especially for the food because he's a chef. I decided to hire a wedding planner because my job is extremely busy. I work in marketing. Asked him to go to a few meetings with me. He said no. When I finally found the perfect wedding planner, I asked my fiance if we could go have lunch with him, and he said no. This is when I blew up in his face. I asked him why he wasn't participating at all. That's when he told me that he was too busy at the restaurant, that he didn't have time to do anything with the wedding. I was like, okay, fine. When it came time to choosing the caterers, I demanded that he go with me. He told me that he would try to get off work, but he never did. Every time I tried to schedule it, he would say that he was busy with work. That's when I told him that his restaurant, which is super fancy, should just cater the whole wedding. And he said no. He told me they were way too busy and ready to get a Michelin star, so there was absolutely no way they could cater his wedding. That's when he said, you can handle it. I trust you. I went home and cried the entire night. Part 3 is up. Story time about how my fiance refuses to help me plan our wedding. Claimers to know my story time. I sent him on Instagram. After I got home and cried, he came home and asked me what was wrong. That's when I told him that he didn't seem excited about the wedding and that leaving all the planning to me made me feel like I was his employee, as if I had nothing better to do, which I do have my career just like he has his. Not to mention the fact that me picking everything I want for our wedding makes it feel like it's my wedding and not ours. He told me that I was overreacting. He also said that he was excited for the wedding, but that he was too tired and too busy to even think about it. That's when I told him that I was really busy and I was really tired too. And he begrudgingly told me that he would carve out some time this week so that we could speak to some of the caterers. I told the wedding planner and he started setting up some meetings. But of course, my fiance canceled on the first 2. He did show up to the 3rd one, but all he did was criticize the food. Then we went cake tasting. I expected this to be fun. When my friends have had cake tastings for their wedding, they always have so much fun. As soon as we showed up to the cake shop, he asked me, where did you find this? That's when I told him that our planner had found it. He said it looked like a supermarket bakery. That's when I told him that I don't mind supermarket bakeries and that it was probably just as good as a French bakery. He laughed and said, wow, you're funny, babe. We tasted the cakes and he actually liked them. Thank God. But then he requested to go to more cake tastings. We ended up going to 5 other places. This was already too much for me. I got a new account at work and I'm still trying to lose weight for the wedding. So him making me run around trying to taste cake is like the straw that broke the camel's back. After 2 weeks, we finally decided on a cake flavor. Most people must have fun planning their weddings, right? But I just feel like I'm drowning. I have to make all the important decisions on my own. I decided to involve my mom and sister and they've helped me so much. Of course, the wedding planner is helping me too, but ultimately the decisions have to be made by me. He hasn't made any effort to help me with anything else. Kinda want to break up with him, but I feel like this isn't a big enough reason to break up with him. What should I do? Secretly hate my husband, but I can't leave him. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Listen to me on Instagram. My husband and I have only been married for 2 months. We dated on and off for almost 7 years. So when he finally proposed, I was actually really happy. The problem is that we never lived together before we got married. He never wanted to move in with me when we were dating. He also had this thing where he wouldn't want me to come to his apartment randomly. He would always schedule times where I could hang out with him at his apartment. This all seems suspicious, but I really wanted to marry him, so I just decided to overlook those things. But now that we're married, I see why he didn't want me to come over and why he had all these these strange rules. It turns out that he's incredibly messy, lazy, and is super picky about the food he eats. So now that I'm his wife, I'm constantly having to clean up after him. Every single time he goes to the toilet, he always leaves skid marks, or for some reason, he always has like explosive poop and it goes everywhere on the bowl. So every single time I go to the bathroom after he does, I'm always having to clean it up. And it makes me so angry that I have to clean up after him that I have begun to hate him. Also, he's super picky about his food. We can never go to restaurants because he never wants anything on the menu. And if we ever do go to a restaurant, we have to go wherever he wants. I love all types of cuisine, especially Indian, Mediterranean, Japanese, but he thinks it's gross. He comes from a very American family. He grew up eating chicken nuggets and grilled cheeses. To him, anything with some spice is way too much. That means I can't cook what I want because he always complains about the smell. Thankfully, he's got an office that's 30 minutes away. So when he leaves, that's when I cook. But I have to make sure to air out the apartment before he gets home. I'm always doing his laundry and cleaning up after him. Every single time he shaves, he leaves hair everywhere. I actually hate this man now. I told him that I don't want to live with him anymore, but he freaked out. He's begging for me to stay, but I'm so unhappy. What should I do? Am I the asshole for cutting off my jealous mom? Disclaimers is not my story time, it's on Instagram. Then she somehow managed to get jealous that my dad and I were getting along super well. She called my dad while my dad was visiting me and threw a tantrum about how she needed him to go home. So my dad cut his trip short just to go be with my insecure mother. After that, I really didn't speak to my mom for about 2 months. I couldn't believe that she always managed to make me feel less than. And somehow she always made everything about her. I reached out to my brothers and asked them if they ever felt the same about my mom, and they said no. My mom was totally different with them. She took care of them and doted on them. Probably because they're boys and not me, because I'm a girl. One day I decided to call my grandmother and I told her everything. That's when my grandma told me that my mom has always been that way and that I just shouldn't take it personally. Apparently when my mom was growing up, she did not have any girlfriends. She always liked staying away from other women to not have any competition. But I told my grandma that she's my mom and that she shouldn't see me as competition. Grandma suspects that something is wrong with my mom, so, I don't know if she's bipolar or something, but obviously I can't diagnose her. Thankfully, I have other women in my life, my grandma and 2 of my aunts. They act like my mom's more than my own mother. When I graduated college, I was actually engaged. My fiance and I bought a house and we started planning our wedding. And of course, my mom wanted to help me plan it. I really didn't want this, but I decided to give her a chance. But once again, she managed to make everything about her. The entire time, she criticized my choices, even my wedding dress, which I absolutely loved, and it really did look good on me. She told me I needed to wear something more flattering. And then she ended up wearing my wedding dress in a different color. After the wedding, I decided to tell my dad and my brothers that I was going to cut my mom off. My dad begged me not to, but I still went ahead and did it. I called my mom and told her that I needed some time apart from her and that I did not want her calling me. Of course, she pretended like she had never done anything wrong in my life and that she's only been the perfect dedicated mother that she wishes she could be. Instead of arguing with her, I told her to just give me some space. She agreed to it and I haven't spoken to her in about 3 months. My dad and grandma keep begging me to talk to her. I don't think my mom is sad at all. She's always posting to her Instagram. She goes to Pilates, brunch with her friends, and travels with my dad. I think she's probably fine. But what should I do? Storytime about how I kissed every teacher I ever had a crush on and never got caught. Disclaimers is not my story time, it's on Instagram. Growing up, I was a spoiled brat. My parents gave me literally everything I ever wanted. For my 15th birthday, I told my dad that if he didn't get me a BMW, I would run away. So on my 15th birthday, I got the BMW. My parents never said no to anything. One time I told my parents I wanted to have a party at my house and they said no. I threw a tantrum and started to cry. My dad pulled out his credit card and told me to stop crying and I could go buy whatever I wanted. And I pretty much maxed out his card. He did punish me for a month, but all he really took away was the TV. As you can see, I was completely entitled. And yes, looking back, I would love to punch myself. I was a complete brat. When I got into high school, I went boy crazy. My parents told me they did not want me having boyfriends, but of course, I put up a fight. They had no choice but to let me have boyfriends. I would bring them over to my house all the time, and I would always take them up to my room and lock our door. My dad told me one time to open the door, and I wouldn't, so he just left me. Eventually, I got bored with all my boyfriends, so I would just break up with them. But one day, this new high school teacher comes in. We made eye contact for about 5 seconds. I was obsessed. Follow for part 2. Storytime about how I crashed my ex's wedding and managed to break them up a month later. I'm definitely toxic and vindictive. So when my boyfriend broke up with me, I knew what I had to do. He and I dated for 9 months. And you could say that I was a little overbearing. If you guys saw what this man looked like, maybe you'd understand. He's the type of guy that all the girls want to get with. Not only is he super handsome, but he's also very successful. And he's a great guy. Comes from a great family and he's really close to them. I, on the other hand, grew up in the foster system, so having a family was always my biggest dream. And when I met his family, they took me in right away. His mom and I essentially became best friends. His dad would take me out to dinners and lunch, and they basically adopted me as their daughter. Here's when things started going wrong. I was extremely jealous and I basically didn't let him do anything. Every time he wanted to go out with his friends, I would start a fight. Anytime he would bring up a female friend from the past, I would simply threaten to break up with him. Trust me, I recognized that what I was doing was wrong, but part of me just couldn't control control myself. I was willing to do anything to make him stay with me. Eventually, he got really sick of me, started mentioning that he wanted to take a break. So that's when I told him that I was pregnant. Was I pregnant? Absolutely not. Part 2 is up. Story time about how I crashed my ex's wedding and managed to break them up a month later. The first time he threatened to break up with me, I told him that I was pregnant. It was obviously a lie and he knew it, so he basically still walked out on me. So in order to get his attention again, I decided to go to his family and tell them that I was pregnant. And they all believed me. His mom and dad even invited me to go live with them during the pregnancy. At first I said yes, but then I was like, hold on a second. How am I gonna fake a pregnancy? So to get myself out of that, I told him that I thought I was pregnant, but I actually wasn't. Yep, I'm starting my makeup all over again at this point. I had way too many layers on. During the time we were on a break, I basically followed him around everywhere just to make sure that he wasn't hooking up with any girls. Finally, 2 weeks later, he called me and told me that he missed me. We got back together, but the same thing happened. I was still jealous and controlling, but this time he was becoming more and more jealous. So much so that he started trying to control the way that I was dressing. Around this time, we started having huge fights. He would punch the wall right by my head. I would throw things at him, even threw a knife at him once. But part of me liked that he was so jealous and toxic. He was obsessed with me. And he broke up with me again, and 2 months later, he was engaged. And guess what? His family invited me to their engagement party. Part 3 is up. Story time about how I crashed my ex's wedding and managed to break them up a month later. That's when I get the invitation for his engagement party. At this point, it seems that my ex's parents thought we separated on good terms. So of course, I showed up to that engagement party. As soon as my ex saw me, he came straight to me and told me to leave. And I told him that I was welcome because his parents had invited me. He gave me a whole speech about how we were over and I needed to accept it. But of course, not one single part of me was willing to accept that. Then he called me an Uber, so I actually did end up leaving. When the wedding comes around, I was the first guest to show up. As soon as his parents saw me, they welcomed me. So I went and sat down at the parents' table. When my ex came out, he nearly fell over. Mind you, this is the first time I'm meeting his wife. I went up to her and told her that I was an ex of his. That's when she looked at me and said, when did you guys date? I said we dated for 9 months. And then she says that they had been dating at the same time. So then a whole bunch of drama goes down. She goes to him and starts slapping him. He starts to cry. And then his parents asked me to leave. So I did. The next month, I followed her everywhere. Finally told me to leave her alone and that they had already gotten a divorce. So my plan worked. Now I'm trying to figure out how to get back with my ex. What should I do?